Obviously, following our discussion today, Ben, who is with me in the room, will release formally the press release. You had an advance copy next week on Monday, so you have a little bit of preview, chance to ask questions, and then to digest the stuff over the weekend, if I may say. That's all on my side. I hand over to Bernard, who will guide you through the main elements as we see them from the annual statistic review, and then we open up for questions.
Thank you, Sylvain. Hello to everybody. Welcome. So we have finalized these annual figures covering the full year 2017, and it's time to share with you. Okay, I try to switch to the next slide. And, oops, here we are. Okay, so I hope you can all see the screen. It's time to share with you, let's say, the most prominent features. And we thought, well, having a webinar gives a good opportunity to talk, get your questions. Of course, the idea is not to go through the whole report. You will discover very soon. It's just to focus on a few points that are more prominent. We will talk mainly about Europe. We are not there really to say, okay, this country, that country, these kind of things, because I think otherwise we'll get too much into details. And it's mainly about statistics. So, of course, you might have, let's say, interesting questions about, I don't know, circular economy, this kind of stuff. Of course, we will take them and we will do our best to answer these questions. But yeah, it's mainly about first statistics, market development, these kind of things. But anyway, all questions are welcome. And we will take them after this presentation. Well, when we look at 2017, once again, we can say, and probably even more this year than last year, this is very strong performance from the European pulp and paper industry. And believe me, I've been in this industry for many years. I mean, we have quite positive figures this year. And before we really get into the substance, I just wanted to use this opportunity to say that, I mean, the data we are presenting are compiled from the national associations. So they come from the national associations, 18 national associations collecting the data from the companies. So it's really figures coming from the ground that are reported to all of you. We don't make any market forecast. So what you see is a picture of last year. We can even say a few words about the first months of the year. And we put this in perspective with long-term, let's say, historical series. Also, something you have to be aware is that we pay a lot of attention to the quality of our data. And we are working according to 3-year strategy where we define priorities. And most of the time it's about quality, but it's about also new products and things like this. And this is something we work together with the National Association statisticians. And that's very important to keep a dynamic mode, because otherwise we could just say, well, good stuff, and nothing new, we just update the figures. So the idea is really to move forward and try to further develop our statistics to the benefit of everybody. We have, let's say, also every year a kind of auditing exercise, and we do this with Deloitte. Before we had experience also with other consultants, and the idea is that they check the collection process and the quality of the data. It's quite demanding, but what we want is really to show that we have good data quality, and we pay a lot of attention to this. The third thing is also about the compliance with the EU competition rules. More and more, we know it's an important thing. Everybody is taking great attention to this, and we have, with law firms, the ability to go through the statistics, have a look, and we had a report done last year securing that we are in full compliance with our competition rules, and I think it's a very important aspect of our stats. Well, 2017, first interesting thing is that paper markets are growing. And well, you are following these developments much closer than anybody else, I think. When you talk to people in the street or journalists who are not specialized in paper, they can't believe it. But it's the truth. I mean, our markets have been growing by 0.5% last year, and this is the fourth consecutive year. So we had, let's say, a bit lower rates over the last years, but 0.5 last year. And of course, it's really benefiting from this more favorable economic environment. I dare to say also it's about the paper attributes that are also in a way rewarding. But when you have a look at the economic growth, I mean, in Europe, we had 2.4% last year. It's going to be more or less the same this year, or 2.3 according to the latest forecast. Growth in the world, and we will see it as also an importance, 3.8 last year. It will be on the same level this year, or 3.9 maybe, according to IMF. So it's a very positive environment. Okay, I don't want to elaborate too much about, let's say, the tensions today. And of course, it might have an impact on this year or the following years. It's difficult to predict. But last year was definitely very well oriented. The fourth quarter of 2017 was particularly dynamic, well above what we have seen during the previous years. And when you look at the consumption, actually, the Cepi internal deliveries, so internal deliveries within the Cepi regions, plus 1.2%. So the domestic market is quite dynamic. Exports, and we will see this, have been also growing by 5%, and imports into Cepi area minus 0.4, so relatively stable or rather a small decrease. So all in all, it's about, let's say, a positive environment. It's about dynamic markets in Europe. It's about growing exports outside Europe. And before I go to the next slide, you would not be surprised to hear that, of course, graphic papers are going down. So in terms of consumption, is minus 4.9%. Newsprint has been very, let's say, on the decline side. But sanitary and household, plus 1.8%. Total packaging papers, plus 3.7%. Other paper and board, which is a lot about specialty paper, plus 3.2%. So it leads to this figure that is positive about 0.5% for the total paper and board. Looking at not only volumes, but also about euros. One of the things we wanted to highlight is really about these investments. According to our the latest figures available and also a little bit of estimates, we are above 5 billion euros. And, well, it's a plus 7.5% increase on 2016. And of course, that's very important because you remember this 2050 roadmap we have been working on and published not so long ago. So that's definitely a figure we are looking at very cautiously. And maybe a couple of other words about turnover, plus 2.6%. You might say, okay, is it about volumes or prices? Well, paper and board production has increased by 1.2%, market pulp production by 4.7%. And, well, we don't talk too much about prices, but prices have been quite well oriented last year in 2017. So all in all, it's about volumes, but also about prices. And maybe some of you also have written some articles about newsprint. And it's true that over the last months, we had people coming back to us saying, well, how is it that newsprint prices are going up like this? And of course, it's about, let's say, supply and demand adjustments. Okay, next slide. You see, let's say here, the production. And you see it match more or less, I mean, in terms of grades, the picture for consumption. So graphic papers down minus 2.3%, sanitary sold plus 1.8%, total packaging plus 4%. And you know that we have had some investments and some new capacities online, also some conversions. So all in all, we have, let's say, paper and board production up by 1.5%, which is yeah, it's quite an important figure if we look at the recent past. Okay, a word about exports. And as I told you, I mean, it's not only Europe that is doing well or has been doing well in 2017. It's also about most of the regions. And we have been benefiting indeed of foreign markets that have been quite, let's say, dynamic. That's why we had this plus 5% increase of the exports. Of course, I mean, we are aware of, let's say, the complex situation today and the tensions arising. And of course, that's something we are following very closely at Cepi. And maybe we can come back to this. And just to say, exports increase to the rest of Europe. So outside Cepi, plus 3%, North America, plus 3%, Latin America, plus 15%, Asia, plus 11%. So all in all, I mean, you see, it's all the regions that have been, let's say, importing more paper and board from Europe. And we can come back if you have questions about some specific countries. Okay. We thought it was also important to say something about market pulp, because you're aware of the massive investments we have had over the last months and years. So we have an increase by 4.7% for market pulp, and total pulp, that is to say market pulp plus integrated pulp, by 1.7%. So it's quite an important, let's say, growth. And when you look at the market situation for market pulp and the growing prices, it's of course something that is definitely important. Also something we wanted to highlight, because it's not that often that we have, let's say, some figures that are going in this direction for employment. According to our latest figures, we have an increase of employment by 0.1%. Wow. So it means that we have a kind of stabilization after many years of decline for employment. Of course, it's fragile growth. We'll have to see in the coming years, but I think it reflects quite well the positive environment, the investments we are making. And that's something we have also shared with the trade unions recently, because definitely it's good news for our industry, but also for European industry as a whole. A few words now turning to recycling. We have reached a recycling rate of 72.3% last year, which is, let's say, limited growth compared to 2016. But of course, I mean, the higher we go, the more difficult it is to further increase this recycling rate. But anyway, that's quite an interesting figures showing that we can go further still and higher. When we look at utilization, utilization has been growing in Europe. And when you look at the utilization in Europe, we had plus 1.4%. I think it's also related to the dynamic developments in the packaging side. And collection has increased by 1.2%. So higher collection levels, higher utilization in Europe, and in terms of export, plus 0.8%, so a bit less than 1%. Of course, we are aware of the context with China, and we can come back probably a bit later on this. And here on this slide, you can see, let's say, the full picture or the map of the trade of flows for paper for recycling in 2017. So most of the vast majority of paper for recycling remains in Europe when it's collected in Europe. But of course, you have huge volumes going to Asia, starting with China. Maybe a couple of words. Of course, we can see that there is an impact from the Chinese measures, and it started already last year in a way to materialize last year, but it's more and more for this year. And, I'm relating here to the limitation to the level of unwanted materials to 0.5%. And also, let's say, the issuing of import license and these kind of things. And of course, it has had an impact, and with the trade war between China and US, it's definitely impacting the trade over between the continents. In 2017, just a few figures, China's imports decreased by close to 10%. So Chinese imports of paper for recycling from Cepi area minus 14%, US minus 9%, Japan minus 12%. So already last year, it has had an impact on paper for recycling markets. And when I look at the first months of this year, and here it's only the first 3 months, because I don't know whether you noticed, but Chinese custom authorities have stopped releasing any trade data, at least for paper for recycling, since March. So we have only, and it's not only Cepi, it's everywhere in the world, people have not had any figures on China's customs for at least paper for recycling and probably scrap materials since March. And over the first 3 months of the year, the Chinese imports of paper for recycling went down by 49%, so close to minus 50%. From Europe, minus 54%, US minus 44%, Japan minus 55%. So you see huge decrease over the first months of 2018, and I'm pretty sure the trend is continuing since the end of the spring. A few things, and I will finalize with this, about sustainability elements. And here I'm referring to environmental impact. We have, let's say, specific CO2 emissions down by 0.8% in 2017. Yeah. So you see, we are down again. So we are on our, let's say, a journey to decarbonization, while the production of paper and market pulp have increased over the last year. So all in all, I think it's very interesting figures. It's good performance for the paper industry for the last year. And maybe I stop here to take your questions. So please.
Do you open the line? Okay, so thanks, Bernard. We're going to reopen the line for everybody. That's again the top line overview of the main elements we saw from the annual statistics review. Strong performance, both in terms of production, in terms of export, in terms of recycling, even despite the drop of paper for recycling export to China. I'm very pleased from my perspective to see the level of investments the industry is transforming and investing into the future. So that's how we see those figures reviewing 2017. We now open up for questions, because I'm sure you have plenty of questions. So we will take those one by one. Who wants to start?
Well, I can start.
Please, Andrea.
You were talking about the China waste import legislation. They recently said that it's even more restricted than before. So which effects will the new waste import legislation have in the coming months, and how Europe will be affected if China really decide to ban all waste imports from 2020?
Of course, I think the impact is huge, and once again, it's not only in Europe. We can see it. Not so long ago, I was reading a press article, I think it was in Italy, about stocks of paper for recycling that are going up and up and up. I even imagine also in summertime there is risk of fire. So I mean, it's quite a difficult situation for everybody. What we have always said is that in the short term, of course, there is an impact on prices in Europe and in the sourcing country, let's say. But in the long term, the idea is, well, what is going to be the impact on quality, medium to long term? So about the quality of the material we are getting in Europe, and is it going to, let's say, further encourage the suppliers of paper for recycling to go up in terms of quality of materials? So that's really about the challenge at the end. But what is for sure is that also the Chinese companies have very difficult times at the moment. There is batch of import of licenses released by the Chinese government to the companies, and we see that some companies are getting quite a lot of licenses and rights to import volumes. But all in all, I mean, they are also suffering a lot. So the issue is it going to be sustainable? You know that in the US, every load has to be inspected. And of course, it's not something to manage easily. You need a lot of resources. You need people to be trained to do this kind of stuff. And we are talking about millions of tons, especially when it's about export from the US to China, and billions of dollars. So it's a big, big issue. And I think it's on the top of the agenda of the politicians as well.
Yeah, I mean, maybe to complement and maybe to supplement, what Bernard said. When you take those Chinese policy measures, level 1, yes, they are restricting imports. They are not stopping the imports. There is a top reduction that we saw coming in 2017, which interestingly had no impact on our level of recycling in Europe. It will be interesting to see the statistic from other materials, not to name plastics. What shielded us a little bit in Europe, and that the interesting dynamic we are trying to look at is what is the interplay with the quality standards we have in place in Europe for paper for recycling. We are the region in the world that has put in place this EN 643 quality standards for paper for recycling. And in effect, what we start to see is that it is driving a better implementation of the high quality standards that are needed. So it could really give a signal that we are moving to a new normal on the paper for recycling market. It will take a little bit of time, for sure, the time to rebalance the things, but where high quality materials will be traded, poor quality materials will have to be resorted. And you see across Europe, in the countries that have some difficulties, an effort to look at how to reprocess those materials, and that will lead to a new normal. I think today what we see is a massive impact on the US market, an impact on the European market. We're not there to talk about price, but it really creates a lot of volatility and problems on the price of paper for recycling. As Bernard pointed out, behind those policies, the Chinese always have also an agenda of how they reorganize their industry. And this is part of their objectives. They are using this also to move out certain overcapacities or uncompetitive assets they have in their fleet. They also drive with this a policy to improve the waste management capabilities in China. So you can expect that this will take a little bit of time, but we are moving towards a new normal in terms of trade relations for paper for recycling with China. And at the end of the day, I think it will be beneficial for the two sides, if I may use this word, Europe and China.
Okay, thanks.
Other question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, okay.
Oui.
Can you hear me?
We do.
Yes, okay. I have a question concerning the other regions in the world. I mean, do you have really good results for last year, but can you compare them with other regions? I mean, Asia, North America.
Yes, yes, we do. In the full statistic annual review, we have the indicators for the other regions. Bernard is flipping the pages of his report, and will answer.
Yeah. So actually, when we look at other areas and the countries, especially we are monitoring, US plus 0.1%. You see, so it's about production here. Huh? Plus 0.1% for 2017 for the US. It's based on the National Association in the US. Canada minus 0.5%. So I think they are still on the same train, which is rather negative, let's say, or not dynamic. Japan 0.9%. South Korea minus 0.4%. Brazil 1.4%, but we are talking about lower volumes. And China plus 2.5%. I don't have the global figure with me here, although I produced some estimates early this year. I think it was close to, I don't dare to say anything, but I can come back to you with a good estimate if you want.
Bernard, are we right to say that if we put aside a little bit the Chinese dynamic, which is a life on its own, we are pretty good? Let's put it like that, compared to our equivalent competitors. We are above, far and well above the level in terms of increase of productions by far at a global level.
Yeah.
You didn't mention any figures about profitability. You had the forecast at the beginning of the year stating that the European pulp and paper industry profitability was higher compared to the previous years. Is it confirmed by the official statistics?
We have the data on added value that we have traced systematically with a pretty robust definition for a long time, which gives you already kind of an indication. The added value is significantly higher this year. Profitability is something we do not report in the annual statistic review because it's always subject to comparing apple and pears sometime. But indeed, Bernard gathers, based on the publicly available information, obviously, the profitability data of the main players. Let's call it like that, and it's pretty good.
Yeah. Indeed, I'm monitoring, let's say, the financial figures of the top 30, 40 companies in Europe. Of course, there are some family-owned companies for which there is no figures available or released. But all in all, I mean, the figures are really positive for 2017. Of course, I mean, there are some realities that are quite diverging depending on the sector where you're operating in the markets. I mean, if you're in graphic papers, I mean, things are a bit more difficult, although we have seen some prices going up for some graphic papers. Packaging is, of course, more or better oriented. If you are in market pulp, well, there have been growth in volumes, but also in prices. I don't want to come back to this, but you have been witnessing the high level of the prices for market pulp in Europe and all around the world. Of course, if you are not integrated, that you are relying on the purchase of market pulp, then that's a bit more difficult. So all in all, I mean, the positive development is really something we have seen for 2017. But yeah, there is some disparity, of course, when we look at the sectors, the markets, and the level of integration. But yeah, positive results for sure.
Other questions?
What do you think it will be in the medium long term the effect of the trade war between US and China in Europe? We saw the other day that the US has announced tariffs on a lot of Chinese products, including a lot of pulp and paper products. And at some point, China might react to this, and this might cause an effect everywhere in the world.
Maybe starting with the trade things, we export about a bit more than 22% of production. So this is very sensitive to us. We are growing not only in Europe, but also outside Europe through these exports. So we are monitoring the developments very closely. You are first, I'm sure, aware that there have been a lot of anti-dumping investigations. I mean, over the last 10 years, monitoring this very closely, we have had about 30 cases. So, I mean, it's a difficult environment for sure. Second, we are looking at this first from the angle of let's say, import tariffs that are imposed, retaliation measures. So we had a look, of course, at what is in the US list of products, in the Chinese list of products. So far, I mean, pulp and paper is not concerned directly by this, let's say, import tariff. But this can change over the coming months for sure. And indirectly, there will be some impact, of course, on all of us. And we can also expect maybe threat to the economic growth in the coming months if all this materialize and start to impact the investments, climate, and so economic growth is something we will have to look at as well. But for sure, we are looking very closely at these very worrying developments because, for the trade of paper and board, but also raw materials, it will have a big impact for sure at one way or another.
I think you linked the key issues. I mean, we are an industry which is closely linked to the economic performance. I mean, you can see that when the consumption and GDP increase, we benefit from it. It's like any other industry. So, I mean, if a trade war was really materializing between China and the US, we would see indirect side effects. We could see displacement of volumes, maybe. It would be even more problematic, obviously, if this trade war was materializing between the EU and the US. We are not yet there, but that's clearly something we are closely monitoring. Our industry, and frankly, all industries at European level are really paying a lot of attention to this.
Okay, thanks.
And bring this back in perspective of the 22% export ratio we have. What maybe needs to be flagged is that within those export ratio, you have different type of products. I mean, market pulp is clearly one driving force for this export. The effect on reductions of consumption and so on will have different impact on different product exports, obviously, and that's where the analysis would have to be done, and it's pretty challenging, obviously. Other questions?
I have a question concerning the newsprint market. In France, we can hear that there is some shortages for some publishers, and prices going up. What is your vision about this market?
So you're talking about graphic paper here, or
newsprint?
Newsprint. I think it's how to say. I think it was only at the beginning of this year that I started to have people coming back to me and say, Bernard, how is it that newsprint prices are going up? What is going on here? And it has been the first time for over the last 20 years, 15 years, for me to hear these kind of things. And well, the answer is quite simple. We are on a declining market. We all know the impact of IT. We also see that since 2008, 2009, with the economic crisis, there has been really a shift more and more to IT, a lower level of investments in printed advertisement, this kind of stuff. So the producers have no other choice than to close down some capacities, or when possible convert, but to a limited extent. So structurally speaking, I mean, the producers have done the job, that is to say, to adapt to the demand. And of course, now economic growth is, let's say, more dynamic. It might be also, well, that also people realize that maybe a better performing advertisement has to combine IT and paper. People maybe realize this. But all in all, we see some tension at the moment and newsprint pricing going up. Difficult to say whether it will go ahead like this for some months, probably, I don't know. But for sure, I mean, the structural trend is still there. So I don't expect that people will read much more newspaper in the coming years. I think it's more about advertisement related to the economic growth.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question related to this. Not only about newsprint, but in the graphic paper sector in general. It's true the prices are going up, and the supply-demand balance is strongly in favor of producers at the moment. But demand for graphic paper in Europe continues to go down, as we see from Eurograph data. So do you think there would be a further consolidation in the next couple of years in the graphic paper market?
You mean by consolidation, you mean consolidation of companies? Or
mergers or closures or conversions in general?
I mean, let me pause a second. We cannot comment on closures, consolidations, and so on. We can really just comment on the market dynamic. I think it's
Okay.
that's one element. I think a lot of people are doing speculations on whether this will close, not close, capped, and so on. And that's what it is. There is I mean, again, coming from outside, I see a phenomenal turnaround of industries converting assets into the growing markets. When you see a market like packaging growing by more than 4% a year, I mean, frankly, either you're in or you're out. Okay, so that just in itself will drive production capacities. And when you look at the total volumes of what is produced in Europe, you see this turnaround taking place. I think it's totally underestimated in our industry and by other industries how difficult it is and how successful we are at doing this turnaround. Now, whether there will be a continuous trend for packaging to grow by 4% every year in the next 10 years and for graphic paper to decline by X% every year. In French, I tend to say, aucun arbre ne monte au ciel. No trees goes to the sky. And you could revert the quote in another direction. There will be still graphic paper use. So how do you strike the balance? I made this long introduction because I systematically see and hear about, oh my God, graphic paper, without taking the entirety of industry. And I really make the emphasis on how do you bring this all together in terms of industry dynamic. But Bernard, you may want to add on the development in graphic paper versus other markets.
Yeah. I think first people have to be aware. I mean, you can make money in declining markets. It's possible. Second, I think the adjustment will go ahead. I mean, you can be sure that companies will do everything they can to remain profitable, even in a difficult environment, for sure. So that adjustment will take place. It's about supply and demand. And I think over the last years, we have seen that the industry has been quite good as adjusting itself to new trends or on the market, to structural developments. What is also a big thing for me is about these trade wars. It's about these tensions, especially on the graphic papers. If you look at, for example, uncoated wood-free, over the last years, we had, let's say, anti-dumping investigation in, I think it was Jordan. We had safeguard investigation in Turkey. We had Morocco. We have at the moment also some investigation with India. So there is a lot of tensions. Also because there have been some investigation or some protectionist measures taken in the US, in a few other countries. So it will also impact the developments in the coming months and years, for sure. But be sure companies will do the job. They go ahead with adjustments when necessary.
If you look at the overall performance again in Europe compared to other regions in the world, and I think that applies well in the graphic segment, we have moved into high quality with competitive assets. The assets that were not competitive in a declining market have been transformed or have been closed. So now we have a fleet of assets for the current market, which is delivering the quality in a competitive manner. Again, as Bernard said, strategically, you can make money, you can make good business even in a declining market. And I think that's the kind of thing that needs to be assessed per company, per regions, and so on. But we are doing the job. We are doing the job. Sorry, short answer, short question, long answer.
No, don't worry, it's good. Thanks.
Other questions?
Yes. Do you have any comments about the beginning of the year? Do you have the figures for the first quarter, for instance?
I should have expected this kind of question. Sorry. If you can give me maybe a couple of minutes, and maybe we can take another question. I come back to you in 1 minute. Okay, I have to go to my office.
Bernard is fishing out his files, but from what I've seen, the very steady market developments and production developments over Q4, the fourth quarter of last year, is maintained. I mean, it stays at a pretty high level, but Bernard will come back with better assessment. Maybe I can take another questions in the meantime, and then we come back to this.
I just wonder if the Brexit negotiation have an impact on your business.
So far, no. For one basic reason is that we are clueless on how the thing's gonna be settled.
Yeah.
So if you take the photo, EU 28 or EU 27 stroke UK, the United Kingdom will be the first trading partner for the pulp and paper industry outside the EU 27. So it goes without saying that we are very closely monitoring and trying to assess what the different kind of options of Brexit could mean. The latest information that were released by Theresa May of a soft Brexit, meaning that she would embrace internal market for goods and then to be seen for services, is pretty positive. I think the companies are not over concerned about possible duties that may be reintroduced or not. We don't believe into this. The real challenge will be more in logistic. How do you avoid custom check and the bottlenecks, if I may say, between Dover and Calais? That's more the kind of things that are a little bit problematic to assess, and anything that would go in the directions on keeping the easy trade that exists will considerably reduce possible impact of Brexit. Now, that's for the direct impact on trade. There are some European countries, obviously, that are a little bit more trade exposed to the UK than others. France actually is amongst the top three. There's Sweden, Finland, France, Germany that are the most exposed to trade towards the in our industry towards the UK. But at this stage again, we believe that this is of limited impact. Now you have to bear with us. The conclusion of the Brexit negotiation will come maybe in October, maybe in December, maybe at the lastminute.com in February. The sooner it is clarified, the better. And that's where we are, all industries in Europe are asking for. It's, please give us a clear process and time horizon and the trade certainties that is needed. This is what we can say.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm back with some figures for the first months of 2018. When we look at, let's say that we have the first quarter already for everything related to consumption and trade. So total deliveries for the Cepi area, we are 0.7%, plus 0.7%. When we look at the internal deliveries, which give a good idea about how market develops in Europe, it's about 0.2%, plus 0.2%. So it's a low increase, but it's still on the positive side. And then exports plus 2.4%. So we are in the same dynamic, let's say. Maybe also you had a question about global market last year. I was looking for a figure for the world production of paper and board in 2017. We had, let's say, we were close to 470 million. So it's a bit less than 1% growth of the world production last year, according to our estimates.
So we are above the global production increase in Europe. So 1.5% increase of our production in Europe versus 1% increase at global level. And it seems that the trend we witnessed over 2017 is carrying on to some extent in 2018 with positive figures on exports and deliveries in Europe. Other questions?
What is the Cepi view on the European Union crusade against plastics? And will the industry in Europe be able to take advantage of this?
There are two sides to the equations. One side is how the market is already shifting. I mean, I believe the markets are shifting much faster than any regulations or policies or whatever, particularly at EU level, where it takes time to get cooked and implemented. So you may have better perspective than I have, and I would be quite curious to hear from you three what you feel on the ground. But from what we hear from the companies and so on, the market has a very strong appetite to go for alternatives to plastic. And that's a trend. That's a trend. Now, the EU plastic strategy will have two effects for us. An effect that it will maybe support that shift. And so certain market segment, whether it's packaging, whether it's for new product, will benefit from it. I mean, it will complement this market trend. The other aspect is that if you project in the long term, meaning 2025, 2030, We will also have in the field, say, of certain packaging segments, certain applications, plastics that are biosourced and highly recycled. So it's quite interesting, and that's what I keep telling in Brussels. The plastic strategy should look a little bit at the success story of paper. They have a lot to learn from us. We know how to separate, collect our waste. We know how to recycle our waste. We know how to utilize paper for recycling. This is something, as you may know, I've been working as sustainability director in a major plastic producers in Europe. This is something that some plastic manufacturers are embracing and will further develop. So it will be quite interesting in the long run. We will be competing on sustainability with the plastic industry with very similar offers for certain markets. But again, the market is starting to shift. And irrespective of the EU policies, the EU policies are accompanying a movement established. Do you see this differently on the market?
No. I think what you said makes sense to me, and not only for the fact that some distributors or big supermarket chains are shifting also from plastics even before the legislation come into force. They're replacing plastic bags with sackcraft bags or with other types of bags. I mean, that's a sign that the big companies are also looking into this. Also, probably because people is more aware, and that's what people ask for as well.
I think it's the key. I mean, I saw we could share it later on. The Eurobarometer. I mean, it's a survey done across Europe. Very big sampling of people surveyed, more than 25,000 across Europe, on the consumer perceptions on plastic, and it is negative everywhere in Europe. There are some countries where it's even more than others. So if you are a retailer, if you are a consumer brand owner, you pay attention to the consumer, obviously, and then you take the decisions that are adequate for your brand reputation, the perception of your packaging, and the product you put on the market. So that's something we see happening pretty rapidly on the market. Now, said that, as I know quite well, the plastic industry and now the paper industry, will there be a 101 substitution? Certainly not. Certainly not. There will be reusable options that will grow also on the market. There will be paper options that will be on the market. It's the story of the plastic bags. They are banned to be replaced by reusable plastic bags, or where it is useful, by paper bags. And so at the end, you have a shift in the market, which is obviously beneficial for us.
Thanks.
We still have a few minutes to go. Maybe you have questions again?
I have no more questions.
Okay.
No more questions for me. No more
Well,
questions.
it's okay. It's okay for me. Would it be possible to come back to you maybe on Monday after having read all this information? Very interesting.
There's quite a load to digest.
Yes, exactly.
So there's no issue to indeed come back to us, and maybe you have some individual questions you would like to check. So do not hesitate.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes, no, that's absolutely fine. On Monday or Tuesday, we can take those to complement what we gave you today. Maybe a final word about our new format of the European Paper Week. We call it now Paper and Beyond. It will take place in Brussels mid-October, 16th and 17th October. We intend to use this event as the place where bioeconomy and circularity meets together. And you know that I've been quite adamant at stressing that we are the material technology that is renewable based and recyclable, and that we should be able to do something out of it. That's the purpose of this event. So Paper and Beyond, it's also looking at what are the next developments in our industry. It's also looking at the new materials that are coming up based on forest fiber. So have a look, and we are more than happy to welcome you at this event. What we may do before the event is, or shortly after the event, is a dedicated press session. But as we are compressing a little bit the dates, rather than 3 days into a day and a half cutoff, we do not at this stage plan for any media specific session during the event. But we would be very keen to hear from you what you would like to get from us ahead of the event or aside of the event. So we look forward to seeing you latest on the 16th, 17th October. Okay.